מיד, הבמה שלך. והייתי די רחוק ממך ולא נותרו לנו מילים לדבר. ברוח סחפה מפרש בודד, בסוף הפכה אותו בודד יותר. מכל חלום ורחש מתעורר, כל עובר. כל מה שפעם היה ונשכח, היום הוא לא חוזר. זה רק כל קמט שבאור נחרט, שהיום הוא כבר בוער יותר. מתוך שאין דרך חזרה, והכל עובר. כל עוד יום רודף, לא יום ולילה, בכל עוד אין חדש על פני האדמה. טוב שרק נשארנו יחד, וטוב שיש לנו למי לספר. למרות הכל אין דרך חזרה, והכל עובר. כל עוד יום רודף, לא יום ולילה, בכל עוד אין חדש על פני האדמה. טוב שרק נשארנו יחד, וטוב שיש לנו למי לספר. למרות הכל אין דרך חזרה, והכל עובר. טוב שרק נשארנו יחד, וטוב שיש לנו למי לספר. למרות הכל אין דרך חזרה, והכל עובר.
And good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon. It's Good Afternoons with Steve. I'm your host, Steve Skurka. Welcome, everyone. Our guest today is Max Eisen. Max, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And that was just Idan Reichel, the Israeli singer. And I chose that song. We always start with one of his songs, Max, but I chose that very deliberately because there's a line in that song that repeats itself that really connects to our program today. And it's in Hebrew, Tov sheyesh lanu mila saper, which means it's good that we have someone who can tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
Good that we have chroniclers of the evil of the Holocaust, like Emil Fackenheim, like Elie Wiesel, like Primo Levi, and as you, Max Eisen. How important it is that we have you to tell the story. And so we're so privileged and honored to have you. I want to first of all introduce the book that you wrote. I want to show it to everyone. It's By Chance Alone. It's in the picture here. It's hard to get it into the entire screen, but it is available. Ben McNally has a link to the synagogue website. You can get it there. And I encourage everyone to get this book and to read it. It's an important book, and it's eloquent, and it's a very easy read, I must say, as well. And first of all, Max, I have to start by congratulating you because you were nominated for this book as a finalist for the RBC Taylor Prize, and I'm a fellow writer, and I know how prestigious that was. And that was in the area of literary nonfiction. And then you won in 2019 the CBC Canada Reads competition. So congratulations on that. And that was a very unique competition because you actually had someone defending your book against your competitors, right? You had to conduct interviews, radio stations across Canada, CBC Radio.
Right.
And at the end of that very thorough process, number one, you won, and number two, you were on the bestsellers list, weren't you?
Yeah, yeah.
What did it feel like, Max Eisen, to be on bestsellers list in Canada? Was that a nice feeling?
Well, that's something I would have really never expected. I mean, that was for a writer. I mean, I'm not a professional writer. I'm a storyteller, but that was an amazing event. I was at home. I was told not to come downtown because they don't want us there when this fight is going on. And they said, "We'll let you know." And I kind of thought myself, better off I'm staying at home, because if I'm not the winner, they'll just tell me to get lost, you know. So, and we're holding on, I'm holding on the line. And they said, you can pick up the phone at 11:45, but we will not, you know, we will not be hooked up. But in case if we are the winner, then you'll have an open line. So we are waiting, and we were hanging by a thread, the last vote. We needed the third vote. And Zaya did an amazing job in the last few seconds of her speech. And I just screamed out. I just couldn't believe it. And the phone was ringing. And the CBC said, get down here in 15 minutes. And so I was practically flying. Like, it was an amazing moment. And
Now you're
it was not a win for me, but it was a win for my cause. You know, I've been a speaker for 32 years. I've been doing this. And how important it is that it got out to so many, every city in Canada I was speaking to, promoting the book for CBC, and every city from east to west, north to south. So it was an amazing event, really, truly.
Let me ask you, though, this question about the acclaim you received. Are you surprised by just how well received, the support, the number of people who want to read this book in Canada so many years after the Holocaust? Does that surprise you, Max?
I'll tell you, if I could show you the letters I have from people, I have a correspondence now with so many people from right across the country, Penticton, you name it. Teenagers that write me letters. Mr. Eisen, never in my life will I complain about little things. Kids write me letters, you know, I'm using your book when I feel down in school, I read your book and I keep going. So this is the kind of information that I'm getting back from people. People tell me I've read it 3 times. And so it's gotten me into the homes of so many people in this country. It's unbelievable.
We're going to come to your book shortly, but I want to deal with the aspect of anti-Semitism and get your perspective as a survivor of the Holocaust. And you know how widespread the problem is, not just in the United States and in Canada. We had an incident recently as last week in Mississauga, where a number of high school students were chanting, "Jews are dogs." You know, very disturbing incidents of anti-Semitism. You had an incident yourself where you had a poster beside various synagogues advertising or promoting an event, a Holocaust education, and across your forehead, someone had painted the word Achtung, attention in German. What do you think about what's going on right now? What is your view?
It is a total shock, and I'm very concerned because I know that it starts with words and it ends in terrible places. And the experience that we European Jews had, it started exactly the same way. Once you open Pandora's box, you can never put it back. And it's very concerning that the Jews have become now the #1 target. They're blamed for everything. It's just like way back, you know, Jews were blamed for the plague, for this, they're taking away our jobs. And now the Jews create a virus and all that sort of thing. So I've had this gut feeling for many years that things were not going right. I've seen universities, how this virus, this hatred arose, and I was telling people, and people would look at me and says, "Max, are things that bad?" I said, you know, in my guts, I know that this is a bad thing. So we are now in a position, Jews here, that we were in the 30s, Jews in Europe, you see. It's that serious.
Mm-hmm. Well, sorry, what would you say to people, Max, even in our own Jewish community, who would say, look, let's not give the white supremacists attention. Let's not give the haters on university campuses attention. Let's just ignore them and let them just shrivel away and go away on their own. What would your answer be to them?
I think that would be the wrong tack. Just as an example, about 15 years ago, I called up one rabbi. I was very upset of what was going on at York University. It's you know, York University. It is a real bad spot. And I called this rabbi. I says, you know, Rabbi, he never met me, and he was one of the most prominent synagogues in Toronto. I said that you need to wake up your congregation, and only you rabbis can do this. You need to get in touch with all the other rabbis. We cannot slumber and just sweep things under the rug. About 15 years ago, and he said, Max, are things that bad? I said, yes. He said, well, I'll speak to my colleagues and I'll call you back. He never called me back. So this is what's happening to the Jewish community. And, you know, I always think, and we need to remember, the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. When it came down to the end, there were a few thousand kids, teenagers who were fighting. There were different organizations, Communist, Bundist, Mizrahi, Aguda, and all that. And they realized that if they don't join up, they will not have a chance to, well, they fought for 30 days. Can you imagine? For 30 days, they held up against the Nazis. And we are running in so many directions in Toronto, you know. There's so many different causes and things. And we are up against a real big engine here that needs real attention and very seriously to be looked at, you know, because this is not children's play, you know, it's very serious. So we had many good years. It seems to me that our life sort of, it's like a ship, a sailing ship that rides the crest and then it disappears in the trough. So we had 70 some of the wonderful years in this country. I would have never thought that I would ever meet this poison that would follow me from Europe over here, but it's here.
All right, let's change from the bad now to the good. And one of the things that really struck me about your book is your description of how you educate and you lecture students from grade 5 all the way to university. And just the incredible support that you received. Could you just tell everyone the story about the school you went to in Sudbury, where they had the stickers of Star of David when you got there, which I just thought was just an extraordinary story.
So I have, in the 30 years that I've been speaking, never had I a confrontation. Well, I had once. I would not get into a discussion with a person who asked me a pointed question, because then I would lose my platform, you see. But I have my time with these students, an hour and a half, and they pay attention, and principals tell me, says, you know, Mr. Eisen, I cannot believe that these students sat for an hour and a half. Their span of attention is 15 minutes. I had such amazing, you know, this is my life and this is my story. And I tell these students it's been such an important part of my life. And they listen, and I had ask me questions. I stay for an hour and a half. They take pictures with me. They want to shake my hands. They write me letters. I have thousands of letters from students. And a university is going to take these letters and digitalize it and do something with it eventually. And you know, all that has been stopped suddenly. And I'm not sure that we'll be able to continue with this in the coming, whenever it's going to happen, because there all the other things that have come into this picture. I'm afraid that Holocaust education will be pushed right out of the school system.
What are some of the more prominent questions? You must have question and answer periods, Max. What are some of the questions that you find recurring when you educate these students? What matters to them?
Well, they are amazed, you know, how a person can survive without clothing, without a shirt or underwear. How do you survive without any food or water? How do you survive working a 12-hour hard labor day, and they are absolutely amazed. And they tell me, if Max could do it at 15, I can do it too. So this is how kids look at it. And this is how they express their feelings in letters to me. And is that...
Am I right that there was a school in Sudbury, a class where they wore?
Oh, in Sudbury, yes. The Holocaust education depends on teachers who want to do it. They have to be very dedicated. You know, in grade 10, they have a few lines about the Holocaust. And to teach the Holocaust, they really have to know what they're doing. So it takes a lot of time to educate themselves. And it depends on the principals in many schools, you see. And if the principal is not on board, then the teacher will not have that sort of a go-ahead deal. You know, it happens to me, it happened often. I mean, I go back to schools year after year. You know, in the 30 years that I've been speaking, I met students in grade 5. I meet them years later in high school when I go to speak to them. They come up to me and said, Mr. Eisen, I heard your speech when I was in grade 5. And then I meet them in universities. And now I speak when some of these students, university students, become teachers. They ask me to come and speak to their students. So it's been a generational thing, you see. So I had amazing experience with students. And it's a very important task that I'm so dedicated, just like all the other Holocaust survivors. But you know, our numbers are dwindling. And we need second and third generations to pick up the ball. We must have this continuity. We cannot have a break. It cannot be forgotten. I cannot imagine. You cannot forget this. And I have a hologram made of me at the Shoah Foundation. And this is how the survivors will be remembered. We'll have our hologram and our books or whatever, but we need our young people to pick up the torch and carry it. And I know everybody it's a busy life, but you know, this is a very important thing as well. You know, I always say that, you know, without history, there's no memory, and without memory, there is no future. So we cannot forget this. They will always remind us, and here we are being reminded now by a lot of other bad characters, you see.
Max, you connect the writing of your book, as I read it, to a chance encounter with your father and your uncle in a selection process when you were at Auschwitz Birkenau, and that something your father said to you that you remembered that led you to write this book. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Could you just describe that?
Well, I was very lucky that I was together with my father and uncle for 2 months. And there was a selection in the middle of the night, and they were taken away. And I had seconds to say goodbye to them in the quarantine area of Auschwitz I. I was talking to them across the barbed wire, and the guard from the tower was yelling because I stepped over the wire that was if you stepped over that, he could shoot you with a machine gun from the tower. And my father gave me a blessing. And he told me that if I managed to survive, I will have to tell the world what happened here. This is the only thing he could say to me, and he said, go. And I was devastated. You see, at that time, we did not know of what happened, of the real picture of what happened to European Jewry. We know that this happened to us Hungarian Jews. You know, we lived in a world where everything was censored. Imagine Hungarian Jews in 1944. We didn't know of what was going on just across the Carpathian Mountains in occupied Poland. Not knowing is a terrible thing.
you have a chapter in your book, very powerful chapter called The Final Seder, and where you're celebrating the first Seder with your family, with all the traditional aspects of it. Your grandfather, who you looked up to, was there. Your family. In fact, you were lucky that your entire family managed actually to be at this Seder, as you describe it. And then the next morning, early the next morning, your life is just shattered and everything changes. And within hours of that, you're on a cattle car, um, standing upright, not able to move, with hundreds of people, with babies wailing, and your life is suddenly transformed, and you have no rights left. Can you just describe what that was like? That and I know it's difficult, but you do write about it in the book.
We lived in Hungary since 1939. It was Czechoslovakia, but we were given to Hungary in 1939 when Czechoslovakia was partitioned. So we lived under Hungarian fascist laws. Jews were eliminated step by step from their worldly possessions, and we had to wear a yellow star, but we still lived in our homes. In 1944, in April, the Seder was April the 14th in 1944, the first Seder. My father and uncle were in a labor battalion somewhere in occupied Yugoslavia, miles away. And by some miracle, they were home for the Seder. And I remember, I can see this picture of my family, everybody sitting around this beautifully set table with all these wonderful foods. I mean, we lacked no food.
You had fresh coffee.
My mother was roasting coffee beans, and to my sorrow, I never had that cup of coffee on the first morning of Pesach, because the rest of the year we had chicken, it was a chicory. And but for Pesach, my mother always roasted coffee beans, and the house was the smell was driving me up a wall. We had and we had geese and ducks and chickens and all these goodies that's come from there, from that. And imagine having a wonderful Seder, and in the middle of the night, a forester knocks on the door, on the gate. I don't know, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't know. And he said, I just came from the pub. The gendarmes are all collecting there. They're having their beer tomorrow morning. All the Jews will be collected. And he said, I want you to come with me, and I'm going to take you to the forest. My grandfather, who had a lumber yard, he was dealing with this man. And I'm going to hide you in the forest. So we were traditional Orthodox Jews. My grandfather was a traditional Orthodox. He was not a Talmudist. He was a man the law was the law. And he said, look, it was not only the first night of Pesach, it was also Shabbat, Friday night. He says, we cannot go on a cart on it's Shabbat. And so it was my grandfather's decision. And next morning, gendarmes are in your home. It's like upside down world, yelling and screaming. Imagine being hauled out from your bed. We knew that we were going to wake up at a leisurely time and walk to shul with our yellow stars, and that all changed. And we were removed from our homes forcibly and collected in a school of 500 Jews from my town. It was a terrible thing. Imagine old people and babies. My mothers truly, they had the toughest time. I mean, mothers had to worry how they're going to feed their family. Imagine leaving our home with a bundle. My mother had a baby in her arm, and the bundle for the baby in clothing in her other arm. And she packed some utensils in a sheet and put it on her back. And next morning, 500 Jews were assembled in the schoolyard and marched through the town. We were telling the Exodus the night before of the Jews from Egypt to freedom. And here it was the Exodus of Jews from my town. Walking through the town, and they were throwing things at us, spitting at us. And I can say that everyone in my town, there were 5,000 people in my town, and 10% were Jews. 90 Jewish families were taken down to a railway station, put into a train and taken to Koshice, which is a large capital city of the province, where 30,000 Jews were locked up in a brickyard. 30,000 Jews. It was misery, red dust from bricks, only 2 taps of water. And I keep thinking of my mother, how did she deal with this baby? The baby was about 8.5, 9 months old. You know, there was no formula. These babies my mother was breastfeeding this child, and there were other mothers in the same, and babies as well. 3 weeks in this terrible brickyard, and then we were loaded into cattle cars. And 4 days and nights in this misery in the cattle car, dehumanized, demonized. 2 old people died. I don't know, I couldn't see my mother. She was stuck in a corner. And she was holding this baby probably in her arm all these days. I mean, I cannot believe it. You cannot imagine the stress. We arrived in the middle of the night, and there is a selection. We arrived in a different world. You could see these SS guards with their insignia of the skull and crossbones, and everything went fast. And I met a guard, a sergeant who was on that platform in 2015, who was a guard who was being charged for being an accessory to the murder of Hungarian Jews in 2015 in Germany. Everything was done in an orderly fashion, as he said. Hungarian Jews were brought 24/7. In 3 months, 450,000 Hungarian Jews were gassed. And my mother with her 3 children, my 2 little brothers, and my baby sister, and my grandparents, they all went together. They were taken to a gas chamber of crematoria too. I found this out. We knew the next day of what this place was all about.
It was the next day that you found out that it was a death camp. Until then, you didn't realize
I
that.
had no idea what this place was. We could see 4 huge buildings with huge chimneys, flames and smoke was belching. I kept thinking until the next day that it's a huge industrial place, it's factories of some kind. And, but you know, I'll live with this for as long as I live, thinking of my mother, or what she must have felt. Imagine 2,000 women and men who were so private to get undressed and to be taken into a gas chamber from there and to die a communal death anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. This is something that I will never forget. And I've been back with different groups, I don't know, probably 35 times. And every time I go back there, I have more questions. So it was a hellhole of, and you cannot describe it, or what our eyes saw there. You cannot put it down on paper. It's impossible.
It was hard to grasp the inhumanity of the whole experience.
Yes.
Your book is called By Chance Alone. And as you read the book, it's quite clear why you chose that title. And it's really that by chance alone you survive, because you are the only survivor of your family. Am I right about that, Max?
Well, right. I have 2 cousins that survived, one from my maternal side and one from my paternal side. Chaim, who went to Israel in 48, and he was a general in the Israeli IDF. And Lily, she lived in the States, and they both passed away. So I'm the only one left. Out of approximately 70 people, there were only 3 of us that survived, the European part of my family. So.
And your immediate family was lost.
Everybody, yeah.
So what does the title By Chance Alone refer to?
By chance alone, I describe after my father and uncle were selected out. And by the way, they were selected out. I have documents showing the day and their number, their tattooed number and their names. They were selected out for Streptococcus hemolyticus experiments, never to be seen again. You see, the Nazis, they put everything down. They were their own archivists and bookkeepers. They put everything down in triplicate. And pharmaceutical companies were using people to,
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? Can I have your attention, please? We're conducting testing of the fire alarm system, and the tones for the fire alarm system will be going.
It's just the realities of Zoom, Max. Don't worry. It happens
did they
all the
know that we were doing this? I don't know.
No, don't worry. It's
You know, living in a condo, that's what happens.
no, it's a Zoom life. Just keep going if you can, if you feel comfortable.
So I had a terrible beating by an SS guard, and I almost bled to death. They had to drag me back to camp. And I was taken to the chirurgische Abteilung, which is the surgical department, Barrack 21 in Auschwitz I. There was a surgery and a ward upstairs. And if you wonder why they did have it, simply because of the deception the Nazis used. They brought the International Red Cross and they showed them, look, we take good care of our people. We even have a surgery. I was operated on. I woke up next morning. I was in a ward upstairs and I thought went to heaven and back. You know, I didn't know what happened to me. And there were two Jewish doctors in the ward upstairs. I remember their names, Dr. Gordon from Warsaw and Dr. Samuel Steinberg from Paris. And I was operated on by a Polish political prisoner, Polish intelligentsia who were arrested, who were in Auschwitz. They were part of the Polish underground. Dr. Roszeszko, and his assistant was a Dr. Sobieszanski. And they operated on me. And if you couldn't walk away from the hospital 2 days after operation, no matter what kind of operation, if you weren't gone in 2 days later, you were loaded on a stretcher and taken to the gas. And I was loaded on the stretcher. They were taking me out to the trucks waiting in front of the barrack. Dr. Roszeszko pulled me off the stretcher, brought me into the prep room, gave me a lab coat, and he said, I'll be the cleaner for the, and I worked for him for 6 months, from end of July 44 till January the 12th, 1945. He saved my life, working in the operating room. So that was really by chance alone. And then I wound up in another camp, Melk, after the Death March, which was in January the 12th, 1945. Some 30,000 of us were walked to death in this bitter cold. The byways and highways in occupied Poland were strewn with bodies, and I wound up in Melk, on the Danube, working in underground shafts. And I said, I'm not going to survive this place. And there was one Ukrainian, there were quite a few Ukrainian prisoners of war. And they helped me out. There was one guy, I describe it in my book. I came down with dysentery. I had a flu and dysentery. That was the first time I had that. It could kill you. And he gave me some charcoal and he said, eat this charcoal. And the charcoal cleaned out my system. So he was another guy that helped me. It was really by chance. And there were a couple others. So to get a title of a book, it's very difficult. And we had thousands of names for the book. And finally, we're 2 days away from printing. And so anyway, with the help of the publisher, we came up with a name by chance alone. And that was it, you know. I said, I like that name. And so that's the way that's how it's.
Max, you describe in the book that your first return to Poland and to Auschwitz-Birkenau was in 1998 on a March of Living program. And that was with a number of young people. I was struck by something you wrote. You said that the camp looked strangely benign. Those were your words to describe when you came back. Why did you use those words to describe the experience as opposed to just being the opposite of that, just this overwhelming emotional experience?
You know, to go back for people, you don't smell the burning flesh, the smoke, because on humid days and most of the days in the summer, Auschwitz is in the worst climatic area in Europe between two rivers, the Sola and the Wisla River, and it's humid. The smoke does not rise, it comes down. There wasn't a blade of grass anywhere there because people would eat a blade of grass. They would eat the bark of trees, you know, hunger, a rolling hunger in your belly, they would drive you up a wall. So the smell, the sounds, you need to smell it, hear it, and feel it. You smell the latrines coming where 10,000 women have to use one barrack for a latrine, can you imagine? And the barking of the attack dogs and the harsh orders of the SS. You go there, I go with adults, and we were in Auschwitz on a beautiful sunny day 2 years ago. Auschwitz 1, 2-story red buildings. And they said, my gosh, there was a little bush with lilac bushes, you know. He said, you know, who would think that this was a bad place? You know, it looks like a tenement house. So this is why it looks benign. I went with my granddaughter. I never thought that I'd ever go back. Amy, Zipporah, she was 10 years old. And she said to me, says, Gramps, I want to go to on the March of the Living. And I was in shock. I said, my granddaughter brought this terrible word up. I said, you know, I said, look, you're 10 years old. I said, when you are 16, we'll deal with it. And so she was 16. And I knew that I cannot let her go alone, that I need to go with her. She was devastated. We were standing at the ruins of the gas chamber of Crematoria 2. That's where my family were all murdered. We always have a memorial service introducing her to her first family. So this is why it looks so benign. People go there, the grass is green. We go there in April or May. There's restaurants and toilet facilities. There are over 2 million people that come there a year. You go to Majdanek, another terrible place. So it's sort of been, the time sort of changed the place in a way. It is quiet, you don't hear the threat of dogs and yelling or a stream of bullets, and but you need to read between the lines, so to speak, you know. So,
Max, do you think there's value then to these March of the Living programs, to the many, as you say, millions of people who go there, almost like a pilgrimage? Do you think that there's value in that, importance in that?
you know, when I go on the march, can you imagine, Toronto is the largest group of teenagers from around the world, more than from the States. I think we have teenagers, 7 buses, and then the young adults and young professionals and adult groups. I meet people carry a flag of their country, and on the day of the march, on Yom HaShoah, we march from Auschwitz 1, 15,000 people in blue jackets, and there's other people, not only Jews, Polish Boy Scouts march, cadets, and people from all over the world. A flag from Japan, and there were 80 Japanese, German teenagers, from Slovakia, teenagers from schools. And I speak to these people who are not Jews. So I tell them, you know, when I tell them that I lived here, they want to hear, they want me to speak with them for hours. And, you know, I don't have that time to do that because I have to, my time is limited there. So people who come there, they really come there for a good reason. I meet students from Tokyo, from Shanghai University, you name it, from Jewish kids from Siberia, from South Africa, from New Zealand, from you name it, Mexico, Panama, and so on. And it's an important thing. And this year, there was no March of the Living. And I would have been going twice a year, and the Wiesenthal Center has we would have been going in July, and that's been canceled. Everything has been canceled. So it is very important. It is a museum, You can see remnants of clothing and shoes and all these terrible things that they didn't have a chance to ship out to the fatherland. And but you cannot bring back the smell and the sounds and the scenery. It's totally different, simply because
You describe,
green grand.
sorry, Max.
Yeah.
You describe in the book the reason you came to Canada, how you came to Canada. Just at the beginning, I just want to mention this. You speak about Rabbi Price, who was a great man, and he's important to me because he was one of my own father's teachers. So I know what a great man he is or was. Can you just describe how it is you landed up in Toronto?
Well, we lived in Czechoslovakia in a place called Marienbad, which was named after Empress Maria Theresa. These are world famous spas, Marienbad and Karlsbad. Prince King George and his cousins Alexander from Russia and German, they always used to come to Marienbad, so it's a world famous spa. And the American Joint organized this, and the city of Marienbad gave us a pension. It had about 40 rooms or 30 rooms, maybe not 30, maybe 20 rooms. And there were about 40 of us boys who were all orphans, their families. We had no families. We were all, and we all gravitated to this place. It gave us a roof and food over our, I had a roof over my head and food on the table, and it was a yeshiva. And there were many kids who came from Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. And some of us that were not, material to learn Gemara and Talmud, we were allowed to learn trades. But most of the other kids, they were learning every day. There was a program. It was kosher. We had a Jewish couple that were our cooks, and we're supported by the American Joint. And the chief rabbi of Slovakia, he knew that we had no future there, so he somehow contacted Rabbi Price in Toronto. And Rabbi Price sent us permits to come to Canada. Rabbi Price was instrumental in freeing a lot of these Jewish kids who were on the kinder transports from Germany to England. Rabbi Ernest, he was at Adad Israel, what was his name? The rabbi from Adad Israel, Irwin Shields.
Yeah, Irwin Shields. Yeah. Irwin, yes.
These were all kinder transports. They were sent to England from Germany. And they were growing up in England during the war. And in 1941 or 42, all these Jewish kids in England were arrested as enemy aliens, and they were put on ships and sent to Australia and to Canada. So Rabbi, he was not a rabbi at that time, Irwin Shields and Kellerman and many others, they arrived in Canada, in Shawinigan. And I heard this story from Rabbi Shields when we were in Sault Ste. Marie speaking at the synagogue. I never heard this story before. They were put into a prisoner of war camp with SS soldiers in Shawinigan. I couldn't believe it. Check it out. And so Rabbi Price was relentless, and they wouldn't let them out. And they said, so finally they took them out of this camp and they sent them up to the logging camps in Northern Ontario, wherever. So Rabbi Price sent us permits. And so we had to get out of Czechoslovakia as not Czech citizens. Most of it. We were 19 years old, we had to go to the army. All of those of us who were born in Czechoslovakia, you see. So we had to get false papers to get out of the country. So otherwise you would have had to go to the army. And then we were getting our papers ready in Prague. And there was a fellow from, his name was Friedman from Poland. He was doing all these documents, and then one night in September of 44, the Czechoslovak government was arrested. There was a coup, a putsch. The president, Beneš, was arrested. They arrested the chiefs of staffs and they took over Radio Prague and it became a communist country overnight. And everything changed a little bit now. The Secret Service came into power and we were caught with false papers and so on and so forth. And anyhow, went through that ordeal, jail in Prague, and we arrived in Toronto. It was not easy to come to Canada. I arrived in a DP camp near Linz in 49, and I went to the Canadian Embassy in Salzburg. All the Jews we were all refused. And I think I was refused about 2 or 3 times. And finally, in October of 45, I was given my visa to come to Canada. So I arrived in Quebec City. I arrived in Toronto in 1949, October the 25th. And I was a ward of the Jewish Family and Child Service. And I lived with a Mr. and Mrs. Cass. She had, they were the parents of Dr. Cass. She had a large family on Huron and College Street, and my life unfolded in this amazing country. So, and we went to the Rabbi Price's, he was giving lessons every day. We had to do that for a while, and so this is how I arrived in Canada.
Okay, wonderful. And we should add, we can't let the story end there because you managed to build a successful business. You got married in Canada. You raised a wonderful family. You have children. You have grandchildren, and Lador Vador from generation to generation.
Yeah.
Which,
So I just want to say, my picture at Beth Jacob on next to chat, I have that poster that's said on it, Achtung.
we're going to come back to that. Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
No, now's the good time because I know I listened to an interview you gave and you said that word Achtung wasn't just randomly chosen. It had specific meaning to you. So go ahead, describe why it's meaningful.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So in July of 44, when Americans started to bomb Auschwitz III, Monowitz, where IG Farben, this huge German chemical company, were building a huge plant and they were bombing at the smithereens. So that was truly something. It gave me such a boost. I said, keep throwing those bombs. We didn't care if it killed us. I mean, it was, Americans were bombing at 12 o'clock at noon and British were bombing at night. And let's see, what was it?
You were going to talk about the post.
Okay.
Yes.
So we knew that the end was coming, but I didn't know how the finale is going to happen. I thought that they'll kill us all before they leave. So selection started in July. The German factories were closing down. They were shipping their equipment back to Germany. So they were very astute business people, these Nazis. If you don't work, you don't get fed, you sent to the gas, and that's it. So one night, it was every night you could hear Achtung, Achtung on these loudspeakers. When they were turned on, the volume was so bad, so huge, you just flew out of your bunk. You were on the third bunk, on the bunk on the top bunk. And it said, all inmates, naked, you need to go to this barrack so-and-so in this building for selection. And by that time, we knew what selections meant. So it said, Achtung, Achtung, all inmates go for selection. So here it was in Toronto, Achtung, Max, pay attention, So this is what it means, because how many people in Toronto would know what Achtung means? They would think it's some kind of a crackpot who just at random managed to pick a word and put it on. But no, to me, it has some terrible meanings. Yeah.
Max, you described testifying in a trial against one of the former guards at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and I believe that was in 2015 in Germany. Can you just describe what that experience was like?
Well, I actually, somebody came to Toronto, a retired judge, whose name is Thomas Walter. He was a judge, a German judge for 30 years, and he went looking for these SS guards who were guards in Auschwitz, and he came to Toronto and he phoned me, and I said, look, I'm going on the March of the Living, and it was just about that time. He said, well, can you give me he took an audio video interview with me, and then somehow it worked out that I was able to go. When we left Poland, I flew from Warsaw to Hamburg and went to the trial. So there were several people from Toronto. Bill Gleed, may he rest in peace, he was there, and Hedy Baum, and Jews from Hungary, Jews from Israel. And there was a big to-do in this town, Lüneburg. It's a 14th century town. And there was a court, and we were brought to court in a bus. There was demonstrations outside. There were many people, German people, who were for us. And there were some that were against us, police, mounted police all over the place. And so it was in a hall, and there's a buzz, there's a press was there, and finally the judges come in and everybody stands up. There's a chief judge and 2 assistant judges, and it's called a tribunal, 5 people, a chief judge, 2 assistant judges, and 2 civilians. And the process began. Prior to that, the side door opened, and here comes this SS man, Oscar Gröning. He's an old man with a walker, he had a brown pullover, and he sat down, and he was sitting there looking at the crowd, with his hands folded up.
Did you make eye contact with him?
Pardon?
Did you make eye contact with him?
Yeah, I sort of, I looked at him. I was able to give my testimony, and and then he was asked questions. Everybody else, and then he was questioned by Thomas, who was who was working for us. So he asked them a few questions, and I'll tell you, those questions are just about, he asked them, why did you join the SS? He joined the SS, he was 20 years old. He said, because of their prestigious uniforms, the SS runes and the skull and the crossbones. He was part of a unit called the death head units of the SS. He was asked, he was on the platform when Hungarian Jews were brought to Auschwitz. He was charged for being an accessory in the death of 350,000 Hungarian Jews. I don't have to recognize him. I mean, I wouldn't know, I wouldn't know who he was. That was enough that he was there, and he didn't deny this. He was there. And he was also called the bookkeeper of Auschwitz. And what he did, as you know, everything that the Jews brought with them was taken away from them. Their clothing, their bundles were taken to barracks that were called Canada, and everything was checked out. Every piece of a Kaiser bun or bread was cut into pieces. People would bake in some gold coins, and after people were gassed, their gold teeth were knocked out. Body orifices were slit open. They were looking for hidden gold, and the gold was melted down into bricks. And Oscar Gröning was taking the loot to Berlin in a metal suitcase 2 or 3 times a week. And he said that. So he was asked, did you have a receipt every time you delivered a load of currency in gold? He said, no. So what else were you doing? He says, well, I had to patrol the platform. So can you imagine, Hungarian Jews are coming. There are 50 cattle cars in that transport. And at times there were 3 transports sitting inside the camp enclosure. And they have to work at one transport at a time because they don't want the other transports to see what's happening. So people are selected out, they're taken to the gas chamber, others are taken to forced labor, they disappear in the camp. And all these bundles are taken out of the cattle cars by inmates. And so there's 50 piles of goods and the trucks are coming and they're loading this up to take it to Canada. So he says, I was patrolling the platform with my comrade, another sergeant, because he says, the inmates who were taking it out of it, he says, they were thieves. They were stealing from the bundles. Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine? I'm looking at this. I said, am I hearing this? I like to go and choke this. You see, to steal is a terrible thing. But to kill people by the hundreds of thousands, that's okay. So he said, we hear a cry of a baby. So we go there and there's a heavy coat covering the basket. And he said, my comrade took this coat away and there was a baby. And he said, in court, did he have to say this? I don't think so, but he came forth. He says, my comrade grabbed the baby by the ankles and smashed the head against the big bumper of the steel bumper of the truck. And he said, the crying stopped. I couldn't believe it.
Max, let me ask you this. We just have a few minutes left. I want to turn to some more pleasant subjects, if we can, to end this, because I know it's horrific for you even to relive these inhumane experiences. But I understand since you've left Poland, you've developed a love of literature, and you actually have favorite authors, and you love reading. Am I right about that?
Yeah. Well,
Who's your favorite writer?
I tell you, I haven't had a good book that I read in many years now, you know. I mean,
Well, Tom Clancy's one of them.
I liked all the classics, you know. Dostoevsky, James Michener, and Perla's Buck. I read them all, you know. And this is how I educated myself. My schooling was finished at I was 12 years old. So whatever I know, I learned from books. So I read all the classics in Czechoslovakia, and when I was in the yeshiva for almost 3 years. When I came to Canada, I lived on College and Huron Street, and there was a main library was right there. So I got the same classics in English, and this is how I learned English, because I understood a few words of English, and the rest I figured out. So I loved reading, but you know, I get the odd book, and somehow I gravitate, and other survivors were writing their own books, and somehow I'm sort of drawn to this kind of stories, and you know, so I've read thousands of books. Now I have so many books, I'm trying to give it away. And
Okay.
I met somebody who's taking these books and is giving it to the Navy. They wind up on ships and something, the Canadian Navy and so on.
And I understand you have a sailboat. You love boating. Am I right about that,
Yeah,
Max?
I've got a small sailboat, and there's a little item there when we are coming to Ebensee in 1945. After a march of 4 days from, we come around in the Alps, and I see a lake below, beautiful blue water, and I see rowboats with Luftwaffe guys. I could tell the uniform, they had the blue uniform, and their girlfriends. And here I am, just walked for 4 days without a crumb of bread to Ebensee in the Alps. And I said, you know, you had to be very positive when you were there. You had to be thinking. I was looking at the scenery, and I said, one day I'm going to have a boat. And I did.
And what a great way to end it. But I do want to ask you one last question,
Sure.
and it's an important one. because it's looking to the future, looking ahead. At a day, you know, when there won't be survivors' accounts. We'll have the movie Schindler List. We'll have the survivors' accounts. We'll have the books like yours, of course, to recount it. Do you think that the horror of the Holocaust will still have an enduring impact as we move forward into the future?
I certainly hope so. There are many people that are trying to erase it, you know, the memory of it. And I think people of goodwill will try to hold on to that. We going to be able to teach this subject, and it's hard to tell. I mean, the only thing that will be left is the holograms, and I don't know if you have seen a hologram.
Yeah.
But, there are a few, my friend Pinchas Gutter, there's a hologram of him, and mine is going to be ready maybe this year or early next year. So this is what will be left. And we have many second generations who are going to teach this subject, you know, whose parents have passed on. And if we are going to be allowed to come and go and to come to schools and teach it, you know. So you never know. It's a fast moving world, and there's a lot of things that are going on. But I sure hope so. It depends on us, a lot on us, of how much we're going to be able to push and get kids involved and do something with the kids that went to the March of the Living. And so I hope so. And I would hate to think that this terrible thing that happened must never happen to us again. We must never be in a position that they can do this to us. You know, and over there, we didn't know what was coming, but here we know what's going on. And if we don't do anything, it's a terrible thing if we just stand by and watch things happen. So this is what I'm afraid of, you know. So
all right. Well, we can say that there are people and there are institutions, Max, who are dedicated to preserving the memory and making sure that that message is
very important. Yeah.
So let me just now, it's now 3 o'clock. I don't want to take one more moment of your time. I'm so thrilled that you agreed to be interviewed for an hour, but obviously very difficult subject. Your book, for everyone, I'm going to hold it up again, is called By Chance Alone. It's available. You can get it through the Beth Sholem website. There's a link to Ben McNally. Please read it if you haven't. It's an extraordinary account. And Max, I just want to thank you. It's been an honor and privilege to interview.
Can I say one more thing?
You have the floor.
So, you know, living through this virus, it is a very difficult thing. You need to be very focused. And there is a small book. The title is Men's Search for Meaning. It was written by Viktor Frankl. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was in Auschwitz I. He was a psychiatrist from Vienna. And I bought this book many, many years ago, and I read it. And he says, he was studying who were the people that managed to survive. The people that managed to survive, and he says it like this: those that had a why, they found the how. And I say, my gosh, he's talking to me now. I have to use his advice, because we are living in that kind of an environment today. It is very difficult for people to be locked in. So those are wise words. We need to be very focused on what's happening. We cannot give up. It's not easy, but hopefully we'll come out stronger after this experience. So read this book, Men's Search for Meaning. I think it's a lot in it.
I should tell you, Rabbi Aaron from Beth Sholem Synagogue often quotes and often refers to Viktor Frankl. So I've heard many of the things that he has described in his writings.
Yeah.
So thank you, Max. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for being part of Afternoons with Steve. We have a wonderful guest next week, the director of the Poli Museum from Warsaw, Poland. Very important subject, going to be very illuminating. Look forward to seeing you, and thank you for spending an afternoon with us. And again, thank you, Max.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye.